Good afternoon. I'm Addie Paranen, Director of Individual Giving at the Free Library of Philadelphia Foundation. On behalf of the Foundation's Board of Directors, Leslie Walker, and my colleagues, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this talk featuring the Free Library's newest exhibition, For the Greatest Number, The New Deal Revisited. Using art and objects from the Free Library's spectacular collection, this exhibition explores the way in which the crisis of the Great Depression inspired the New Deal's government investment and aid, an exceptionally timely topic as we re-examine some of these same questions today in a moment of fresh uncertainty and change. And now I'm delighted to introduce you to today's speakers. Caitlin Goodman has worked in the Special Collections Division of the Free Library of Philadelphia since 2013. As curator of the Rare Book Department, she manages the collection level priorities of the department and is especially invested in expanding access to collections to all Philadelphians by cultivating a shared sense of ownership of the library's cultural heritage materials. Laura Stroffolino started her career at the Free Library 10 years ago as a catalog librarian, cataloging a range of materials from Russian language books to teen fiction to rare books. Since 2015, Laura has been the curator of the print and picture collection, where she works to increase the accessibility of the collection through collection management and exhibitions. We're so excited for this program today, but before we begin, one note of housekeeping. Caitlin and Laura will be taking questions from you, our audience, at the end of the program. The chat feature is open now and will remain open through the program, so please feel free to populate your questions into that box as they occur to you throughout the presentation. And now, Caitlin and Laura, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Addie. And thank you so much, everyone who's joining us today. We are very excited to share this exhibit with you and hopefully inspire you to make a visit in person. So before I dive into what exactly we want to revisit about the New Deal, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that while Laura and I curated this show, exhibitions at the Free Library are a major collaborative project. And I also want to thank our donors, the Independence Foundation, and the IFPDA Foundation, whose generous support made the exhibit and its public programming possible. It's a joy to be able to collaborate with our fellow library workers and museum professionals, and it's also extremely on brand for this particular show. So there are a lot of ways to think about how to tell the story of the New Deal and the Great Depression. For example, looking through the Free Library's own catalog, there are more than 400 books and related resources just about FDR. None of them, unfortunately, are this awesome button. Or we can think about the vast array of government offices created as part of the New Deal. There's a lot of them. This amazing political cartoon didn't make the final cut for the show, but it does give a sense of the popular context of the New Deal agencies. Critics still complain today about an alphabet soup of inefficient government agencies, just as they first did in the earliest days of the New Deal. But rather than focusing on the bureaucracy or the chronology of the period, our exhibit instead looks at the people who don't have hundreds of books written about them. We want to revisit the New Deal by looking at the people who made the New Deal a reality through their work, the art and the artifacts of their workers.
New Deal agencies employed 20 million workers, including about 10,000 people working for the Federal Art Project. The Philadelphia Fine Print Workshop was created in April 1937 and was located at 311 South Broad Street. The poster workshop was located on a different floor of the same building. 90% of the employees in the workshops were on needs-based relief. Between 1937 and 1943, the artists in these workshops produced hundreds of prints and posters. When the WPA ended, the print and picture collection received a large collection of over 1,300 prints, drawings, and posters from the print and poster workshops. One of the artists who is most represented in our WPA collection is printmaker Dox Thrash. Dox Thrash was an innovative artist and printmaker who gained recognition for his realistic depictions of Black life. Thrash was born in Georgia in 1893 and traveled around before settling in Chicago in 1911. He attended the Art Institute of Chicago at night for 4 years before joining the U.S. Army during World War I. After the war, Dox Thrash used his veteran benefits to continue his studies at the Art Institute of Chicago full-time, finishing in 1923. He traveled around some more before settling in Philadelphia in the late 1920s. After arriving in Philadelphia, he found work as a commercial artist, designing posters, business advertisements, and running a sign painting business in North Philadelphia. He soon realized that in all his studies at the Art Institute of Chicago, he hadn't learned the art of printmaking. He went on to develop his printmaking skills under Earl Horder at the Graphic Sketch Club, now the Fleischer Art Memorial. In 1937, Thrash joined the Federal Art Project and started working with the Philadelphia Fine Print Workshop. The Philadelphia Workshop focused on creativity and technical experimentation. While working at the Fine Print Workshop, Dox Thrash and colleagues Michael Gallagher and Hugh Mesabov invented a new printmaking technique, the carborundum mezzotint. So carborundum is a brand name for abrasive gritty silica crystals that printmakers use to prepare lithographic stones. But in a carborundum mezzotint, the carborundum is used to roughen the entire surface of a copper plate for etching. And then the image is created by using burnishers and scrapers to remove some of the roughness from the plate. When inked, a plate prepared like this will produce a broad range of velvety tones ranging from pale gray to deep black. In January of 1938, an exhibition of work by WPA artists opened at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and included the first carborundum prints publicly exhibited. These 3 prints by Dox Thrash, Michael Gallagher, and Hugh Mesabov. And soon, the Philadelphia Fine Print Workshop received recognition for developing this new printmaking process. The carborundum mezzotint leads to a richly inked and velvety image used to great effect for Black portraiture by the Black printmakers in the Philadelphia Fine Print Workshop, like Dox Thrash and Raymond Steth. And our exhibition also includes some examples that show what a labor-intensive process printmaking is. Here we see the evolution of Claude Clark's etching Evening Meal. So first, Clark made a drawing. He also prepared a plate with a waxy, acid-resistant material known as ground. He then transferred the drawing onto the plate by tracing the drawing using carbon paper. So etching uses acid corrosion to cut designs into a metal plate. The longer the plate is in the acid bath, the deeper the lines are cut into the plate and the darker it will print. The framed image on the left shows the drawing on top, the carbon tracing in the middle, and a time chart. The timing chart records the time the plate is in the acid bath. So it might be a little hard to see, but the top of the chart is the least amount of time, and the bottom and darker rectangle is the longest time. Then to that frame's right, we have a long frame with multiple prints, each showing the stages of Clark's incremental refinements. And then finally, we have a finished product, a signed print. Now that the plate is satisfactory, more signed edition prints can be made. And in relief print making, like this linoleum cut, each color is printed from its own block. A multicolor print will be printed multiple times. This 3-color print starts with blue, and then the second state has orange printed on top of the blue. And finally, the finished print with the addition of black. And this finished print is also on a higher quality paper. Now, the Free Library itself hosted New Deal work projects on site. Out-of-work musicians and composers were hired to copy unpublished orchestral scores for the Fleischer collection. At its height, the Federal Music Project at the Free Library employed over 100 copyists and musicians to create performance sets for the stage from composers' unpublished manuscripts. The project made it possible for major North American orchestras to perform the music of composers such as Aaron Copland for the first time. And the Free Library of Philadelphia itself also benefited from New Deal work projects. Our 1939 annual report talks about the completion of necessary building maintenance, like painting, masonry work, and roof and sidewalk repairs. Now, before Caitlin tells you more about how we used the art and artifacts of the workers to shape the themes in our exhibition, I want to highlight the exhibition's website and some special events. Our web address for everything related to the exhibition is freelibrary.org/greatest-number. At that site, you can browse the calendar of related events, explore exhibition items online, read more about related topics, listen to music from the New Deal curated by our music department, hear a podcast about CETA, a Nixon-era jobs program modeled on New Deal art programs, and see book lists for further reading, including firsthand histories, a list of our works consulted, books and other related material about the arts of the New Deal, and fun titles for younger readers. Our scheduled programs are happening online and in person throughout the city. The first event is coming up September 30th, so visit the website to register for this online cooking event. Now, we have a few events at Cecil B. Moore Library. That's located on the same block as Doc's Thrash's house, and we've connected with the team working to preserve this important landmark for a printmaking event. Cecil B. Moore Library will also host an event where participants can make fire cider, an ancestral recipe using easy-to-find ingredients. And we'll also have 2 make-your-own poster events with posters for the people, one at Donna Tucci Library and the other at Parkway Central Library. And on Monday, November 8th, we'll host a panel discussion asking the question, what should a New Deal be? The 4 Philadelphians on the panel represent art, labor, and public policy. We hope that this event can be in person, but it may shift to a virtual program as the pandemic continues. So just check that events calendar for updated information. Now I'll hand it over to Caitlin.
Thank you. So as you've heard from Laura, when we talk about the exhibition, we are talking about much more than just the stuff hanging in the walls of the gallery. Part of what makes the library's exhibition program relevant is that it is an opportunity to connect people to events and resources from across the Free Library. And in the exhibit gallery itself, it's important for us to emphasize that we are drawing on the fantastic richness of the Free Library's collections across all of Parkway Central's subject departments, and not just those considered to be part of special collections. We would not be able to tell this story without the rich store of material from the subject departments, alongside the fine art and prints from the print and picture collection and the other special collections. So the story we tell in the exhibit is divided into 4 key themes, hopscotching around the 1930s and early 1940s. We don't spend time going into the granular details of which agency bottom-lined what program or which politician pushed for what project. But please do check out that further reading Laura mentioned if you want a deeper dive into the history. Thanks to the vibrant objects on view, you can, and many, perhaps most, will have a fine time in the gallery without ever paying attention to the broader themes, which is actually, to my mind, a unique strength of a museum exhibit. The stuff really can do the talking. But today you're stuck with me, and I am indeed going to talk about the larger themes at some length. So although the Great Depression was at heart an economic crisis, it was also a crisis of national morale. The country and its people were struggling. The great bulk of government investment went to major public works, like airports, which, as this boosterish publication makes clear, were a great way to hire loads of workers from relief roles while also promoting national pride. And beyond infrastructure, tens of thousands of people worked on arts and culture programs with a more local focus of rebuilding and redefining community morale. These arts programs, like the community art centers and craft workshops opened around the country, were overwhelmingly segregated, and intentionally so. The story of the New Deal is not just an uplifting narrative about the power of Americans building something together. It is also part of a longer, continuing story of national inequity based on white supremacy. So this show tells more than one story. It is very much a celebration of the spectacular American printmaker, Doc Thrash, and his colleagues in the integrated Philadelphia fine print workshop, like Raymond Steth, whose print of a Philadelphia refinery you can see here. But the national statistics of New Deal relief tell a bleaker picture of anti-immigrant nativism, sexism, and especially racism. Not everyone is judged equally deserving of this, quote, more abundant life. Before the Great Depression, there wasn't a nationally organized Social Security. Aid was somewhat ad hoc and very much local, but the magnitude of need really unmasked the myth of American self-sufficiency. So New Deal programs, very intentionally, worked to rebuild a damaged faith in communities. This is a detail from the key to a very large social base map of Philadelphia, a WPA project to chart the assets of a community, in this case, the entire city of Philadelphia. It's really a very large map. Scale is one of those things lost in a digital image, and it is an accurate accounting of 1939 institutions, from elementary schools to storefront churches to soup kitchens, plus the Parkway Central Library, which here is the triangle labeled 15 and then corrected to 13. But the social base map wasn't intended for navigation. It's also a persuasive accounting that the city does have community assets available to its residents. Look, we're rich, if you think about it right. This emphasis on community building can be seen across the arts programs of the New Deal. Millions of people first got to experience live theater because of the WPA's Federal Theater Project, for example. Not all of their productions were as famous as the Macbeth production previewed in this magazine clipping. And many of the Federal Theater Project's most successful shows were lower budget variety shows and popular reviews. Still, the Federal Theater Project is probably more famous now because of its various controversies, mostly related to a longstanding terror in America of catching socialism. Of course, many people today have no association with the acronym WPA at all. But for those that do, frequently it calls to mind the poster workshops, which the Print and Picture Collection has a wonderful store of. You can buy a WPA style poster today on Etsy. It's an aesthetic, but it also was a form of local propaganda, celebrating a kind of community wealth that went beyond bank statements. All this arts funding cultivated an amazing alternative wealth of cultural production. And I do want to emphasize this cultural production was really a tiny part of New Deal funds, about 3% total. But it was an investment that lasted until it didn't. Arts programs were cut, and many of the artists on view in the exhibit were never paid to make art again. There may be something uniquely American about the short attention span for crisis. Unemployment and poverty weren't somehow solved by 1939, but the national emphasis on a social safety net shifted with the onset of World War II. And of course, this exhibition project began years ago, long before the pandemic-related eviction moratorium was instituted and then abandoned during a continuing pandemic. It's something of a national pattern. Because for all of the idealistic rhetoric of Roosevelt's speeches that, quote, we all go up or else we go down as one people, end quote, the reality of a crisis is different. Some people get evicted. Some people just get richer. This costume design for a never produced ballet has bankers frolicking through a shower of stock market ticker tape. In the early years of the crisis, there was a lot of public demand for sweeping government intervention. This photo is from a 1932 march on Philadelphia's City Hall, where World War I veterans demanded their combat bonuses, part of a nationwide action that summer. President Hoover, who was president in 1932, was absolutely destroyed in the 1932 presidential election, several years into the Great Depression, and several months after the Veterans Bonus March to DC ended, with him ordering a violent eviction of the World War I veterans and their families that had camped out on Washington. For a long time, that public pressure ensured the success of the experimental initiatives of the New Deal. People together demanded a shift in the orientation of the country, one that built the beginnings of a social safety net. Things we may take for granted today, like unemployment insurance and Social Security, come from these populist demands for organized aid. But this popular emphasis shifted quickly once America started the economic engine of war. Artists in the various New Deal projects began creating tons of patriotic posters, drawings, and prints, as directed by Washington and its cutely renamed Artsenal for defense. And yet, arts programs were pretty promptly shuttered. Historical surveys were abandoned. Relief work across all New Deal agencies was replaced with enlistment and wartime manufacturing. In many ways, the experiment ended. But as I said earlier, this show isn't actually a chronology of the New Deal. So the end of the era isn't the end of this particular story. From the earliest days of the New Deal, critics complained that the whole thing was make work from an inefficient government. And at the risk of surprising you, we argue that the critics were right. It was make work because the government had decided that the most important thing was useful work for a living wage. New Deal programs hired workers from relief roles as part of an ethical argument that a country is responsible for the welfare of its people. This employee handbook for new hires to the WPA has been fully scanned and it's available online. And honestly, the whole thing is worth a read. It's both great graphic design and a really fascinating historical artifact. It is clear that the metric of success was not efficiency, but the rationale for jobs programs, from print workshops to dam building, wasn't as simple as keeping Americans from starving either. There are easier ways to do that. So when we revisit the New Deal, we aren't just looking at our history. We're looking at ourselves now. What do we owe our neighbor? What does our country owe us? Thank you again for joining us today to hear about our newest exhibition. We hope you'll come and visit it in person or connect with it through the events and resources inspired by it. We are happy to answer any questions. Addie will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A, so please type away.
Thank you, Caitlin and Laura, so much for this fascinating presentation. It's really pretty amazing just how relevant all these materials seem 90 years later. So I know we have one or two questions, starter questions from the audience, and I hope you all will continue to populate your questions into the chat. And I will get started with the first one. I'm a little bit curious if you could tell us more about just kind of the behind the scenes, the way that these exhibitions come together. Because, of course, the timeliness of this, it feels so fresh. It feels like you came up with this idea 2 months ago and poof, here it is installed in the galleries. But I know it's probably been in the works a lot longer. Can you tell us a little bit more about the process of coming up with an exhibition and the planning and the sourcing of materials that goes into it?
Well, in a way, it's eternally timely. But yes, this started to be keyed to the census and the idea of who in America counts. How do you make your voice heard? What voices matter? But the reality of politics is, people have been talking about the Green New Deal, for example, for years. In an unemployment crisis like one we're focusing on now, jobs programs, again, are a huge interest. Infrastructure that was created by the New Deal is now catastrophically failing every day. So there is sort of a, unfortunately, eternal time hook on this. But it's also important to sort of acknowledge the artistic expertise on view by some of these artists and really give a showcase to the print collection. So I want Laura to address a little bit about that too.
Sure. So a few years ago, we were approached to do a complimentary exhibition to an exhibition about the work of Dox Thrash that is still planned for the African American Museum in Philadelphia. And because we have so much work on Dox Thrash, I didn't want to do an exhibition that was just about Dox Thrash, since that's what they were doing. So I approached our special collections curators with the idea of doing something related to the New Deal. So that was the initial thinking of, we have a rotating exhibition schedule that we plan 2 exhibitions a year. And Caitlin, volunteered and said, yes, this is where we should definitely do a New Deal exhibition. And then we started doing research, and this is the approach it took. So like Caitlin said in the presentation, if you just go into the exhibition and you don't even read a label, you will enjoy the exhibition because there's so much to see. There's so many prints. There's models of houses, just a wide variety of interesting things. But when you see if you take the time to read the labels, or if you listen to Caitlin's presentation and you see, how we've pieced it together, and that was all from doing research throughout the free library, system itself, just simple catalog searches, and then diving into our special collections like our map collection and our children's literature research collection, and particularly our government publications department, which has many, much of the factual information, like that book that Caitlin mentioned that is scanned, those things are from the government publications department.
Great. Well, actually, that's a perfect lead in to my next question from one of our audience members. She's curious about, I know, Laura, you mentioned the initial deposit or bequest, I guess, of the primary core print collection. But maybe you could talk a little bit more about how that came about, and then some of the other objects, like some of the objects that are there, not just part of the prints or books or maps, part of the library collections.
Oh, absolutely. So the Free Library has several special collections. There's the rare book department, there's the Fleischer collection, the map collection, the theater collection, and the print and picture collection. Did I catch them all in my quick rundown? And
Children's literature research collection.
Children's literature research collection. I think that's
the only one you missed.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully.
Well,
otherwise someone will be mad at us.
I was going to use them as the example. So Children's Literature Research Collection has material donated by a children's author, Catherine Millhouse. She was also the director of the poster workshop for the WPA. So the Children's Literature Research Collection has some posters in their collection, but they also have these model houses. So we come about things in different ways. We get things by donation, we purchase things. The bulk of what the print and picture collection has or not the bulk of what we have in the print and picture collection, but our WPA collection, is actually a loan from the government. It's still tracked by the General Services Administration. And so that's the 1,300, it's about 1,200 prints and drawings from the print workshop. And they also at the same time in 1943 gave us about 116 posters, but they don't track those. That's not part of that official loan because they were considered more ephemeral. But the other material is still considered a loan from the government.
Wow, thank you. Wow, what a story. These are all kind of leading into the next question. We have a question from someone wondering if the pieces need to be rotated because of light levels or fragility. Did you have to do any conservation treatments for any of these? Tell us a little bit about the prep that went into that and whether you're having to monitor those materials.
That's a great question. Some of the people whose labor is invisible in a talk like this is our collection care department, who we work closely with to assess any object that goes on exhibit. And then they also do the conservation work that some things need. So in this show, many of the things were in very good condition. They're not that old, quite frankly. And there was still a lot of like paper mending that our colleagues in collection care would do. Aside from all of the digitization, which is both a joint effort from them and the IT department to get the images up online so that people can browse them who will never make it to the gallery. But we do concern ourselves with light levels. Light does damage stuff sort of irreversibly. And our gallery is set up with UV filters so that you don't get any of that particularly damaging light. Daylight, for example, is extremely bad. So if something comes to us from a private owner who maybe had it displayed on the walls of their house, it's going to look a lot worse than if it's been in an institutional collection. Maybe does a little bit more light management. And then the other two things that we are concerned about are temperature and humidity fluctuations, along with just sort of basic things like the building being stable. So it's definitely something that's on everyone's mind a lot in special collections.
Yeah, I think the whole city over with our recent flooding stress, I think for all of the museums and special collections in the city, there's a lot of monitoring to be done at all times, and especially recently. We have another question about whether you, as we all know, when you're putting on an exhibition, there are only so many stories you can tell. Were there any that you had to toss out at the end, you just didn't have room or you weren't able to fit them in? And would you mind telling us a little bit about those?
I'm just going to say the words rural electrification for Caitlin.
Yeah, that's the one. So one thing that doesn't get talked about anywhere in the show, whether the text or the objects, is the Rural Electrification Administration, which is one of the, sort of alphabet soup of agencies that the New Deal funded, which was bringing electricity to rural areas. So it's in parallel to what people are talking about today with infrastructure projects to bring internet to rural communities, in that it is something that sort of people assume everyone has, and then the reality is that no, everyone doesn't have it. But it was such a thing in the 1930s that there was this like cottage industry of prints and books and photographs about high tension linesmen who were stringing the electrical cable. And so we had like a whole case that was all things called high tension, and it didn't fit. So
well,
high tension will have to wait for another day.
And in case anyone's interested, it looks like Laura has shared the poster for high tension in the chat, so you can get a look at that and have an idea. We also have some curiosity about just how you chose. I think that there is a disconnect sometimes between the way we look at art of the WPA and some of the other projects that went into, some of the infrastructure projects and the building projects. Can you talk a little bit about how you went about representing those things? Art is a very easy thing to represent, of course. And how did you talk about some of the broader projects that maybe weren't quite as visually, represented, but were equally as important?
Well, my first thought is that things that about the other projects were presented in visually interesting ways. If you go to see the exhibition, you'll see, things about airports and airways and the fonts, a lot of it has a really good look to it anyway. There are a few things that aren't, very visually interesting, like just a typewritten manuscript. But so we did not overfill the exhibition with typewritten manuscripts, but it was not hard to find visually interesting things in the government publications department.
Because it was such a comprehensive project, I suppose.
And also the 1930s was a pretty rich period for graphic design, internationally. There were just like a lot of things that have made a continuing impact on how we think about graphic design today. And because so many of the government publications were designed to build public support for these programs, they were designed to be engaging in a way that maybe, a budget reconciliation binder today isn't. They were designed to be sort of disseminated more widely to the American public as like a, go New Deal kind of thing.
Well, great. Thank you for that. We have a question here about the music playlist that you mentioned, Laura. What a cool idea. Can you tell us a little bit about the collaboration in creating that playlist and what went into that selection process?
We did not create the playlist, but we asked a supervisor in the music department, Will, if he could come up with a list, and he came up with a great list, and then they built the playlist, and it's on Spotify. We do have the sheet music for Brother, Can You Spare a Dime in the exhibition. So, that is on the playlist. But other than that, we left it to them.
Perfect. That's so interesting. And were you able to include any of the pieces that from the photo you showed us of the scribe program, or I can't remember what it was called, the transcription program?
I actually don't think we do have anything on that playlist there, but that's a good idea. We will, coming up, we'll have a blog post sometime. Like if you look at our website, you'll see that there's some like blog posts that were written in the past and a blog post about the exhibition, but we actually have some planned, to come out during the exhibition, and there will be one about Fleischer then, about the Fleischer collection.
Wow, that's wonderful. And think of the time in Philadelphia's history too, in the Philadelphia Orchestra. What a fascinating time in Philadelphia that must have been, especially for musicians. Let's see. Well, I think we have time for one more question. I'm just going to scroll up here because I want to make sure I haven't missed anything. We have a few questions actually about any exhibition highlights coming up in future, whether you have anything on the calendar coming up for following this exhibition.
We do. We built the calendar a few years out. So coming up next, which will be in March of 2022, will be an exhibition both here at Parkway Central and then also traveling around Philadelphia, celebrating the enormous Muslim community in Philadelphia and the really wonderful collection of Muslim manuscripts and paintings held by the Rare Book Department. So that one will be curated by Philadelphians who have a cultural or a spiritual connection to Islam. And that will run through August of 2022. And then following that is a project, the Chronicling Resistance project, that is just starting to sort of get the object list built now. But there are a dozen activist fellows who have been hired by the Free Library to talk about how their community activism work really connects with the history of Philadelphia as a place of resistance and as a site of resistance.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you for sharing those details with us. We'll look forward to the next Curator talk. Oh, and Laura, thank you. Laura's also shared in the chat so that you all can see 2 other exhibitions that are currently up. Just so you can pop by while you're here. It's coming to see for the greatest number. So many thanks to you both. Thanks. This was a wonderful afternoon. As we can see on Caitlin and Laura's last slide, this exhibition has just opened to the public and can be seen in the William B. Dietrich Gallery on the 3rd floor of Parkway Central Library. It will be on view through February 4th of next year. So for members joining us today who are interested in an in-person curatorial tour, the individual giving team would be delighted to arrange those tours upon request. So please feel free to email us at giving@freelibrary.org and we can take it from there. It's been a real delight to be joined by you all, our audience today, and I'm sincerely thankful for you, our Pepper Society members, and your steadfast support of the Free Library and its programs. I know a number of you already plan to join us on Wednesday evening, October 13th, for our virtual Pepper season opener featuring Jonathan Franzen. If you have not yet RSVP'd and would like to attend, please email our team at pepper@freelibrary.org for more details. We look forward to seeing you as our program year kicks off. While we hope to be back to in-person events soon, we are so grateful for the technology that allows us to gather virtually. Many thanks for your support and enthusiasm.